everyone. How are you today? Thank you for coming out. Good, good. My name is Rob Blatt, and I represent the American Technion Society. And before we get started today, we're going to play you a short video. Rabbi Cohn wished he could have been here. He got all the way out of state for some business he had to deal with. So we'll put that up on the screen. Let me see that, and we'll get going.
Hello everyone and welcome. And I am so sorry not to be with you. I want you to know, friends, my sister graduated from the Technion. She earned her doctorate at the Technion in physics and engineering. The Technion is close to my heart. I spent many hours in the Technion at various different times. And in fact, while working in a law firm in Haifa and Tel Aviv, I lived near the Technion. I lived in a neighborhood called Neve Sha'anan, which is right outside the Technion, up on top of the central city of Haifa and the downtown city of Haifa. The Technion is a remarkable place, a very special place. Established, and initially wherein the faculty spoke German until they spoke Hebrew, established before the establishment of the State of Israel, as a special technological institution in Israel that I think its founders didn't know how it would grow and how it would evolve and how it would develop. And it has become a center for innovation, a center for solving so many issues and making so many advances, and has now become a campus wherein so many different kinds of people, such a remarkable mix of people are there and are working together. I want you to know it is remarkable to me, meaningful to me, special to me, that we at the Temple-Tifereth Israel are learning about the Technion and experiencing some of the talent that is growing at the Technion and some of the people who are teaching and working on some of the most acute problems we currently face. And so, I want you to know I look forward to hearing more about this session. I look forward to learning what you have learned this afternoon. I deeply regret not being with you. I want to thank Rob Platt and all the affiliates who have worked hard on making this event happen, as well as our temple staff, and look forward to being with you soon in the future. Thank you so much. All my best.
So thank you to Rabbi Cohn. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm not a born Clevelander, but I've been here for about 57 years. And I started working for ATS back on April 4th. So I am a newbie, although not a newbie to ATS because they've hired 3 people since then as a growing organization. The American Technion Society raises money for the Technion over in Israel, which is the School of Technology over there. How many of you are familiar with the Technion? Just a show of hands. Oh, wonderful. Okay. Much better than I usually have. So the reason that they hired me here in Cleveland was to not only create awareness for the Technion, but quite frankly at some point to start raising money for them as well. But before we can raise money for them, we have to make friends and get people to understand what we do. So just a little bit of history on the Technion, and then we're going to turn it over to Charlotte, who I think you're really going to enjoy. The Technion was founded in 1912. They started their first classrooms in 1923. And at the beginning of their tenure there, Albert Einstein had come over. He planted 2 trees on the campus, which if you ever visit the campus and if you're ever going to Haifa, please let me know. We'd love to arrange a visit for you when you're there. You can actually see the 2 trees that he planted. He then went back to Germany and he started the first Technion Society to raise money for the university. And a lot of people will ask, well, why did we raise money for the university? So, when you look at Israel today, Israel would not exist if it was not for the Technion. So, and the reason I can say that is the Technion built the streets, the sewer systems, everything that you see today in Israel that you get to enjoy, the running water, is all because of the engineers at the Technion. Over the years, though, it has also grown, and it's moved into aerospace, it's moved into sustainability, environmental, it's moved into medicine, all of those things that, you know, we think about. And so what we're doing here and around the world through the societies is raising money to allow the research to continue. Some of the very innovative and neat things that you may not think about, but that you use every day that came out of the Technion. Is everybody familiar with what a PDF is? Okay? The technology behind a PDF came out of the Technion. You ever used a jump drive, flash drive? The technology that invented that came out of the Technion. 43% of the companies that sit on the NASDAQ today are run by Technion employees. If you look at the gross national product in Israel, 50% of it is driven by Technion graduates and the research that comes out of the Technion. $20 billion. So it is a vital part, and some people will say that without the Technion, without a strong Technion, we don't have a strong Israel. So when you listen to Charlotte today, and as she tells you about what she does and the Technion, you're going to hear some of the most innovative things that we are looking towards the future. Dr. Voigt is very, very innovative. She was named 30 under 30 over in Europe just recently, and I think that you will find her story very fascinating. So please enjoy. We'll do question and answer after her remarks, and then afterwards we'll be able to go out and enjoy some refreshments and you can continue your conversation. So thank you for being here. Thank you to the affiliates, the Temple Women's Association, the Chi Lifers, and the Brotherhood for helping us put this on together. And most importantly, thank you to my wife who helped me get it all put together. And thank you for Charlotte for traveling such a long way. So it's all yours.
Thank you. No need. I think the mic is on already, right?
Yeah.
And the presentation as well. So we'll get started. Let's see if that works. It does. Does it go back? Where do I point? Okay. You know what? I'll just try it like this. So my name is Charlotte de Vogt. I was born in the Netherlands. I came to Israel about 3.5 years ago. Time flies. I started my group at the Technion a year ago, a year and a couple of months. And I'm here today to tell you about catalysis. How many, another raise of hands, how many of you know what the word catalysis means? That's a lot less than know about the Technion. Yeah, but that's good. So catalysis, just before we start, all that you really need, I'm just going to point it somewhere and then hope that it, that it goes by. All that you really need to know is it's like a chemical magic wand, okay? It turns stuff that's normally not going to react or not going to react very fast, it turns it into something else. Great. You can look at it as a sort of tunnel through a mountain that you need to overcome. Let's say you're on one side of a certain chemical, and you want to get to the other side. You have a big energy barrier that you need to overcome. It's like walking over a huge mountain. What the catalyst does is it makes a tunnel through the mountain. It makes it a lot easier to get home, to get to the place where you want to be. That does not work very well. I'm just going to carry it on the keyboard. So that's all that you really need to know about catalysis. That it makes stuff chemically happen that otherwise wouldn't happen. And it's already responsible for about 1/3 of the world's global gross domestic product. You don't hear about it a lot, but it is the powerhouse behind everything. Okay? Catalysts are in nature, they're enzymes. Enzymes are catalysts. They're actually the best catalysts that we have. Nature has optimized its catalysts over billions of years. And we also use catalysts for everything from oil refinery to, that doesn't sound very good, from oil refinery to probably where you know it from, the car catalyst, right, the one that you have in your car, that's also a catalyst. Yeah, so I'm going to start by telling a little story. About 2-3 weeks ago, I was in Berlin. I was lucky enough to receive a prize. And on the 3rd of June, which was the day that the prize ceremony took place, was also my grandfather's birthday. He turned 90 and he came, they drove from the Netherlands to Berlin. And I took the opportunity to about him, about what a generation means, what a generation of catalysis research means, what 90 years of a lifetime has done for us as humanity. Okay, so when he was 6 years old, first of all, he was born in the Great Depression, and when he was 6 years old, nuclear fission was discovered. When he was 13, 14 years old, it was used on the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. At 45, he saw a man land on the moon, and we managed to both open and close a hole in our ozone layer during his lifetime. And of course, the thing that's pointed at me right now and what I have in my hand, the technological revolution that happened, might be one of the most impactful that happened during his lifetime. And I would argue, of course, I might be a little bit biased as a catalysis researcher, but I would argue that that's mainly driven by two complementary things. One, oil, and the other one, catalysis of oil also. So on this graph, you see the GDP, the gross domestic product per person, so what the average person has to spend over the last 3,000 years. I guess we can all agree that 1,000 years or 2,000 years ago, the economy looked a little bit different than it does today, but also we can agree that the way that we live our lives right now, especially if we compare it to 90 years ago even, is a lot more comfortable. We have cars and refrigerators and TVs, and all of these things are made from oil, driven by oil, mainly. So what's so special about oil, which was discovered about 120 years ago? Oil is a soup of hydrocarbon molecules, and if you don't like chemistry very much, that's okay. I like to compare molecules to Lego blocks, and if you would see a barrel of oil come out of the ground, then most of the colors of the Lego blocks that are in that crude oil barrel are black and white, carbon and hydrogen. They only differ very much, the molecules, in their size. So there are different Lego structures of different sizes. And about 20 to 30% we can actually use directly. They're C2 to C4, ethylene and propylene. They're gasoline, which is about C10, 10 black Lego blocks. But 70-80% we can't even use when it comes out of the ground, depending on where the oil comes from. It's actually getting more difficult and more difficult to get good oil. We're on the dirty stuff, on the stuff that we really can't use right now. So, of course, when we started using our combustion engines, etc., we had to find a way to utilize or make the most out of that black gold, right, that we were taking out of the ground. So we came up with a process, say we, but I was not born, about 80 years ago, which is called fluid catalytic cracking. Okay, and what it is, it's basically a pair of catalytic scissors. It cuts up these huge structures of Lego blocks into the blocks that we like to use, C2, C4. Maybe some gasoline, etc. Fluid catalytic cracking breaks up these huge hydrocarbon structures into smaller ones. And that makes basically everything. It helps us to make yarn, toilet seats, linoleum, plastic wood, electrical blankets, fishing rods, fertilizers, everything comes or is powered by oil, and especially fuels. Especially fuels. Humans and oil, it was really a love story. Until it wasn't. You can't really see which city that is on the left over there, and that's the point. That was Los Angeles in about 1970. Okay, there was such bad smog that people would walk around on the street with gas masks on. You wouldn't be able to see a couple of meters, a couple of yards in front of you. The smog was that bad. Your eyes would be tearing up. And about a third of the Los Angeles had severe lung damage just from the environment, just from the gas, from the atmosphere that they were walking around in. And this is a graph of the very unhealthy or hazardous days in Los Angeles since the 1980s. Okay? It used to be so that 1 in every 2 days, Los Angeles were told to stay inside, close their windows for their own health. And this was the same period of time when 1/3 of people still had severe lung damage and were walking around with gas masks on. Birds were dropping out of the sky, literally. And now, we have about 0 of those days, on average. We still don't have amazing air quality in Los Angeles, but the population in Los Angeles tripled, and the amount of automobiles quadrupled, and we figured out that smog, the acid rain, for example, which we also don't hear about very much anymore, comes from mainly our emissions. Because aside from just those black and white Lego blocks in the oil, there's also a little bit of blue and pink, nitrogen and sulfur, which if you don't take out, it doesn't hurt, let's say, our combustion engines too much, but it does do really bad things for our environment and for our health. And again, we saw birds dropping out of the sky. We felt that it wasn't good for us. Our eyes were tearing up. So we decided to do something about it. Legislation was brought in place that allowed us to magically remove sulfur from our gasoline and nitrogen, those black and those blue and pink Lego blocks from the oil. And of course, we didn't do that by magic wand. We did that by two main catalytic processes. One is hydrodesulfurization. That's the other huge oil refinery, catalytic oil refinery process that we have. And the other is the automotive three-way catalyst. Three-way because it does three things. It converts carbon monoxide into carbon dioxide. It converts soot into carbon dioxide. And it takes the NOx's, the nitrogen oxides, and forms nitrogen out of them, which is an inert molecule. If we breathe in nitrogen, nothing happens. It's actually the most abundant molecule that we have right in our atmosphere. So that's great. And the removal of sulfur and the removal of these nitrogen compounds, that allowed us now to be in a much more livable environment. Of course, legislation needs to get more stringent and stringent, but this car catalyst and removal of sulfur really did the job. And it's worth noting that the technology for the automotive catalyst actually already existed 30, 40 years before it was implemented. There just wasn't a legislative push or an economic reason to put these catalysts, which contain platinum and palladium, these pretty expensive things, into cars, until we decided that it was necessary. And now we come to the next part of the story, because aside from just burning the sulfur atoms and the nitrogen atoms, we also burn carbon. Actually, we use our car catalyst to make CO2. We also make CO2 when we're burning gasoline, and we use a lot of it, not just in our cars, but it powers almost everything. And CO2 is more dangerous, I would say, because we don't feel it. Our eyes don't start tearing up. We don't see birds dropping out of the sky. Actually, what we emit today, we're going to feel at its worst in terms of warming up the Earth in 10 years. There's a 10-year delay in feeling the global temperature increase from what we emit today. And that's scary because people need to know that they did something wrong. They need a slap in the face. And this is why we call CO2 the silent killer. Yeah. So a lot of people at the Technion, especially also my group, think, okay, we know that it's going to cause this global temperature increase only 10 years from now. How can we incentivize chemical industry to do something with this molecule right now? In my head, the best incentive is always economic. If we can make a valuable product out of CO2, this would most likely be a very good incentive to utilize it. But we also know by now from all of the IPCC reports, the consulting companies that write these reports on how the world is going to warm up, etc. We know that we most likely really need negative carbon emissions as well. So we need to take the carbon also out of the air and lock it away for at least 100 years in order to stay, let's say, in a not too high increase in terms of global temperature. By now, I guess you could understand that. I guess you can guess that we need a catalyst, but which catalyst? How does it work? We aren't doing this yet. And we need to scale up these processes extremely fast because we actually only have about -3 to 5 years left, which is really not a lot of time if you're talking about implementing technologies at a large enough scale to make a difference in order to do something with it. So what my lab does at the Technion is catalysis research, all kinds of different catalysts. So we use light, we use radiation, infrared radiation, but also X-rays. We go to synchrotrons, particle accelerators, to study catalysts while they're working, to make little molecular movies of how they work, in order to know what to do, in order to make more valuable products, in order to make processes more efficient. That's our let's say, main goal. So catalysts can often be, like a big class of catalysts in industry are metal nanoparticles on a support. And we study them in spectrometers like this. This is a reactor that we use. We can go up to really high pressures and temperatures and really mimic what's going on in industry so that we study realistic process conditions, which is something that we weren't doing up until 10, 20 years ago. How crazy is that? We have a third of the world's global gross domestic product affected by catalysts, and we basically don't really know how they operate. Catalysts are found empirically, meaning we find catalysts, we don't design them. And that's something that we're trying to change. So we're trying to build a database of how catalysts work, how every metal works, how every adsorbate is on the surface, and go to details that I won't get into right now. I don't want to bore you too much. And we use that information to make a whole range of different a whole range of different environmental processes or environmentally involved processes better. So, in other words, we're trying to figure out which knobs to turn in order to make a valuable product out of CO2. That's one of the things that we're researching. Okay, what is a valuable product out of CO2? CO2, it still contains one of the black Lego blocks that we also got out of oil. So in principle, we could build with them, right? We could put the Lego blocks together instead of cutting them up into smaller pieces. So how do we tune our catalysts to do that, especially if we know that a metal nanoparticle of about 3 nanometers, which is as fast as our fingernails grow every second, which is very, very, very small, all over that nanoparticle we have different sites that have different activity towards different things. And we're trying to map out how this tiny, tiny little thing works in order to nano-architecture it to make more valuable products. So we were pretty successful. My studies, most of the studies in my group were very fundamental, but we were able to increase by 20 times the amount of carbon-coupled product from CO2 on a catalyst that's not on a metal that's not even supposed to make any carbon-coupled product, which was a success. And there are a lot of people who were actually making real applied systems out of this stuff, real catalysts that make even longer hydrocarbon chains. 5 years ago, this was something that was really state-of-the-art, let's say, to have maybe 5%, 10% conversion into carbon-coupled products. There are processes right now that have 30, 40, 50% yield to value-added products out of CO2 right now already. That's fast progress. We are progressing fast, which is great, because we need to. But we don't just have carbon dioxide that we need to valorize, right? We also have renewable electricity that we need to store. What happens if all of a sudden we don't have fossil fuels that we can burn when we need to have energy, as we do right now, but we have the sun that shines when it wants to shine, or the wind that blows when it wants to blow, and we need to store huge quantities of electricity. For example, in Europe, where I'm from, in the Netherlands, we don't have sun in winter. So we need to store 420 terawatt hours of electricity over the next 10, 20 years. We don't have batteries to do that. There's just not enough battery materials, at least for the batteries that we're using right now, to do that efficiently. So we need to come up with new ways to convert renewable electricity. So again, another process that we're working on, convert electricity to chemicals. Making hydrogen, for example, catalytic process. We need to get rid of our plastic waste. Have you heard that there is an island in the ocean that is made up of plastic waste that's larger than the state of Texas? That's a problem. We don't have a good way to recycle plastics at all. About 10% of plastics right now can even be recycled. The other ones we don't know what to do with them, which is a big problem. And very likely, plastics are made by catalysts. Very likely, in order to depolymerize them, in order to make something useful out of them, or even properly break them down, we would need a catalyst. Another something that we're starting to work on. We want clean transportation, fuel cells, net neutral hydrocarbon fuels, meaning use CO2, we make a hydrocarbon fuel out of it, and when we burn it again, the sort of below the counting stripe, it's net neutral, right? We take CO2 out of the air, make a fuel out of it, release it again, net neutral. And we don't want to be naive. The chemical industry has huge amounts of investments, right? The chemical plant is billions of dollars of steel in the ground. And that needs to be amortized, we say in English? Yeah, amortized. That needs to be amortized. That takes decades. They're not going to tomorrow decide to switch to a new technology if that money is still just steel in the ground, right? We're going to have certain chemical processes for decades to come. So we need to have more efficient catalysts, more efficient processes that we can drop into the technology that exists right now. And all of these things are based on catalysts. So even though we don't know too much about the word catalysis, maybe, it is what drives everything, and it is what will drive our future. And this is a very nice quote from Albert Einstein, who is the founding father of the Technion. The world, as we have created it, is a process of our thinking, and it cannot be changed without changing our thinking, which is something that we are trying to do at the Technion. And for that, we are planning to establish a new center, which I'll talk about a little bit after this. And it revolves around solving all of these problems. So the drugs that we create, for example, 100 times more waste in terms of weight comes out of producing a drug than let's say for 1 kilo of drug that we produce, 100 kilos of waste is produced. So we need to make these things better, especially with the world population increasing at the speed that it is. Again, plastics, polymers, we need to produce them better, and we need to break them down better. Synthetic fertilizer is a beautiful catalytic story. About 120 years ago, there was a big crisis on Earth. People didn't have enough fertilizer. At the time, we would take guano, which is bird droppings, and we would mine that in Chile. There's a huge mountain, there was a huge mountain, it was all gone at a certain point, that they would mine the guano and they would ship it around the world, and that was slowly disappearing, and there was no way for us to create fertilizer. What is fertilizer? It's atomic nitrogen, a form of atomic nitrogen. Nitrogen, as we have it in the air, N2, is the strongest bond that we have in chemistry. Triple bond, very strong. And we had no way of breaking that by ourselves. Let's say nature had a good way of doing it, but it was doing it pretty slowly. So there was this huge crisis around making sure that there was enough fertilizer to feed all of the people that were already on the world. And Fritz Haber, came up with a process which now increased the capacity for human life on Earth by 6 billion. Half of all of the nitrogen atoms that you have in your body, and that's a lot of atoms, come from that process. We would not be where we are today without that catalytic process. But it also emits 2%, roughly 2%, of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And that's because it happens at 300 bars of pressure, which is very high pressure and very high temperature. So we need to improve that process. Cement, the way that we're producing cement is also a huge emitter of carbon dioxide. So what we're focusing on is coming up with solutions very fast. That's it. We're doing from fundamental research to really applications-driven things, and often we marry the two very well. And how we want to do that in this new center that we're creating is by making this goal, this common goal that we have, an actual physical location. We're building a building, and there are going to be young faculty members, stars from around the world, in a huge open space, and they're going to have access to state-of-the-art facilities from day one. So right now, for example, I told you I started my group a little bit over a year ago. My lab is not yet ready, which is normal. It takes some time to design a lab, especially the stuff that I need. It's very safety it's very hard on safety, on the safety unit, because we have hydrogen, which can explode, and we have, all these kinds of things that need to be done. So it takes maybe 2 years before my lab is set up, which, yeah, I can't do what I want to do, or 50%, 60% of what I want to do the way that I want to do it now, which is a little bit frustrating. And again, that happens everywhere. But the idea is that these young people will come into the Technion, and this is the first time any institution is doing something like this, in an incubator program. We'll have people from biology, computer science, electrical engineering, chemistry, which is where I'm from, and they will be working in this facility where from day one they have the equipment that they need, they have all of the setups that they need, and they'll grow there until their tenure, and then they'll go to their own respective faculties, and at those faculties that means that there'll already be a strong link between this sort of group of people having worked together in this building on a common problem. And not only that, it'll be completely interdisciplinary. In science, scientific ideas, like real fundamental breakthroughs, often can't really be planned as much as I would like that. Often it happens when you're speaking with your colleague who is a mechanical engineer, or I have now a student, actually I'll show the picture while we're at it, which is just a great, I love this story. I don't know if you were aware of the X Prize. Elon Musk gave out $100 million for the best negative carbon capture technology, for the best CO2 locking and storing away technology, which was a really good reason for a lot of people around the world to start working on that issue seriously. And he also had a student prize, a student competition that I put together a team for the Technion for. I sent out to all of the students in the Technion, and I don't think that we discussed this, but the Technion is one of the hardest schools that I know to get into. And I've been at, Stanford and Berkeley, and I know my way around, let's say, the academic system. The Technion students are some of the highest level that I've ever encountered, concentrated in a location that's accessible, luckily. So I sent it out to all of these already brilliant students. They have to be, otherwise they wouldn't be there, and could handpick from every faculty the best of the best, and ended up with students that were hackathon champions and already had 7 startups, and just the craziest stories, Rothschild scholars, and amazing students, all of them. And we were sitting in this competition. We got in way too late, so we ended up not actually submitting to the prize, but after 3 months of experiments, we had a huge patent. We patented technology, and it's actually flowing patents from that specific group of people right now, which is amazing. And we have people from every faculty. Like I said, Asaf on the right, he's from medicine. He was doing a combined medical degree, which was also very difficult to get into, and he came with ideas that I would have never even considered. And the same for Or, who was working on water desalination, a huge topic in Israel, and something that comes from the Technion. Why we have water in the desert comes from the Technion. And he came up with a process that I'd never even heard of, and he said, "Isn't this interesting?" And I thought, I guess, yes. And the more I learned about it, the more I thought, wait, we can probably do something with a catalyst, which again is my background, in order to make what we were aiming to do much more efficient, which ended up turning into this patent. So this is a technology that we are now developing together with one of the huge water companies in Israel. We have a facility where we're testing our technology and hopefully are scaling it up over the next coming years to be something commercial. So from really fundamental research, which is what my group does, we go to applications in rocket speed. That's what we hope. And that's what we are trying to focus within this center, to basically have this little experiment that we did with these students working on that specific problem, to have that happen on a large scale. And not just me, but to have 10 young faculty members, again, from all around, sitting together, working on problems in such a way that hopefully the technology that we have is going to drive Israel Israel's economy and also allow us to do tikkun olam, which is eventually also what we're here for. So with that, I would gladly take any questions. Thank you. No need. Thank you. So this is the question. At the end of the day, I was asked the question a lot, why did I come to Israel and why did I go to the Technion eventually? I spent also a lot of time at Stanford and Berkeley during my PhD, and I really did love those places, and you know, also wonderful students obviously there. But the thing that we have in Israel, and especially at the Technion, is that there's a level of support and of a want for each other, my colleagues, to succeed that does something very special. You're in a critical situation in daily life, and having your colleagues around you be happier for your success than you are for your own and everything that comes with it, of course, support and helping one another, and that's not something that you can find, especially in top competitive institutions like those where I have my background, or have been a lot during my PhD. People are extremely competitive, and they're not necessarily that happy that you succeed over them, for example, which has all kinds of negative consequences. So, long story short, I think there are smart people everywhere. The concentration of really smart people at the Technion, it's extremely high, but the factors that are surrounding, like sort of existential crises, make invention and innovation just sprout, and that's something that you're not going to find in many other places in the world, if any.
Hospitals with robots. So the Technion is doing research on that. They're doing research at Carnegie Mellon. Carnegie Mellon is the #1 in the world in robotics. And I'm sitting with the head of the robotics program, and he is asking me to please find a way to be able to bring Technion students to him to do their postdoctoral work, because he finds them to be the most energetic, most engaged, most hardest working students he's ever worked with. And so that's the wonderful environment that's created there, and it's why students go there. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. So I spent many years developing technology and commercializing technology where we took landfill gas and processes using CO2, liquid CO2 from landfill gas to remove contaminants, and then utilize methane and CO2 that we recovered. CO2 was very pure, very clean, and I think we found a lot of obstacles because small projects are very hard to finance.
Right.
And the biggest competition was inexpensive natural gas, and inexpensive fuel always was competing and putting small projects at disadvantage. But there were many instances where, for example, rather than using or finding a catalyst, and I hope you'll be very successful, there are current ways of utilizing CO2. Like, for example, you can make methanol using methane and CO2 using a catalyst, but still, it's a product that everybody needs, and methanol is a basic chemical that is used for production of just about everything. CO2 can be used for freezing instead of electrical refrigeration, and that would offer you another option of saving on production of electricity.
Right.
You can use CO2 as in a greenhouses, and they were doing it. So there's a lot of utilization that's currently available, and I was hoping that Israel and
into too many details about what we did, but because it's more sciencey than I thought that most of the people in the audience wanted to do. So we actually published a study. I do, like I said, or maybe I didn't say, I do from really fundamental stuff. I love looking at nanoparticles and how they behave. I just want to understand that. To socio-techno-economical analyses on whether these types of technologies are ever going to be applied and how we can actually do that the best way possible. So we published in Nature Catalysis on the Sabatier reaction, which is simply CO2 hydrogenation. And we assessed whether a certain economic situation, whether this would ever lead to a viable option of utilizing CO2 with hydrogen for different technologies. So it happens to be that in Germany, there was so much subsidy on solar panels on the roof that they were the first in the world to have a surplus of electricity. They threw it away. They just put it in the ground. They released, let's say, the electricity. So this creates an economic situation that didn't exist before this, right? So basically, we had free electricity. Then it makes it very cheap to produce hydrogen if you have electrolyzers, obviously. But even at the efficiency that the electrolyzers are working right now to produce hydrogen, the combination of point sources of CO2 with 80–90% pure CO2 to just make methane already makes economic sense. So these are the types of technologies, and specifically in Germany this was the case, but this is going to be the case more and more in the world where we're going to have larger and larger shares of renewables. So the storage of liquid methane is much cheaper than the storage of hydrogen. And again, we need to store 420 terawatt hours of electricity from summer to winter in Europe, which is a crazy amount. But in the salt caverns that are available in Europe right now, we don't even have enough CO2 emissions a year to ensure, let's say, that those 420 terawatt hours can be stored. So we would need 15 years at least of every point source of CO2 in Europe, which is crazy, to save all of that up as this chemical battery, and then we would be able to do it, which is great news. Point sources of CO2 can currently, with high technological readiness level, already be employed to function as a renewable energy storage device. So my answer is absolutely we need to utilize CO2 in certain locations. We also don't need to utilize CO2 in certain locations. So we need to come up with a whole array of different technologies, because what can work in Germany right now where they have this surplus of electricity is not going to work in Australia or in a different place in the world. The same holds for the Haber-Bosch process, which right now is the one process, even though there are different catalysts and etc. There's different temperatures at which it's employed. This is the one process that provides all of our ammonia. Has to be done at a huge chemical plant because otherwise it's too expensive, right? Otherwise it's too expensive per molecule of ammonia. Now we've come up with technology recently that's much cheaper to make ammonia on a small scale, which means it's still cheaper to do it on a really large scale, like in highly populated areas, it would make sense to still do Haber-Bosch. But in the desert or in anywhere in the world that's relatively remote, it would make sense to build these cleaner, smaller technologies, like plasma catalytic ammonia synthesis is already something that can be done. So where we came from, obviously I don't have to tell you where we came from, one size fits all in terms of our energy and materials, we're now going towards a whole battery of different technologies that are going to be geographically dependent on what to employ where. And it's always really important to realize, this is something that you said about the greenhouse gases, which it's true, but this is what they're doing in the Netherlands as well. They're creating like a circular economy, they call it, of carbon. And that's good, and again, all efforts are welcome and should be done, but that's not the scale at which we're producing CO2. Actually, 90% of all of our fossil fuels all of our fossil fuel usage goes towards energy, and only 10% goes towards materials, and about the same amount goes to food, which means that if we're not coming up with a solution at the scale of energy, it's not going to be enough. And we're working on one of the technologies that I was talking about with ore and the water desalination. It's a carbon capture and, is this being live casted? Because now I'm going to talk about technology. Okay, so I'll try to make it as gray as possible. We're working on a technology that can capture carbon in water without adding any energy source, because we're using it as a process that already needed to be done for something else. That is very gray, but it's a solution that has the potential to capture enough carbon in terms of the process that we already needed to do anyways. It's driven by renewable electricity. So there's this economic loophole where we can store away carbon. And technologies like this, again, would not have existed if Or wouldn't have walked into my office and say, hey, isn't this interesting? I would have never ever read those types of papers because they're just not in my field. It takes an energy barrier to overcome, stepping outside of your field a little bit. So a lot of different things need to happen. The one thing that we know for sure is that it's all going to involve catalysts. And another cool thing about the gas and the CO2, about methane and CO2 high purity, there's a pilot factory in Germany right now, an Audi, they're actually utilizing these municipal waste gases that they're doing biomass gasification. They have methane, they have CO2. So, nice. So there's good stuff going on, but it needs to be done faster. Yeah.
Quick question, probably related to what you were saying. Recently I read about the DAC process, direct air capture. Undoubtedly related to catalysts, right? I mean, but it was a general article.
Yeah. So direct air capture, it encompasses everything. So you have, this is what we wrote in that article, you have two types of CO2 emissions, localized, delocalized. Localized CO2 emissions can be from things like this, industry, cement production, steel production, where the streams of CO2 are 80 to 99% pure, which is cheap, right? To do something with that CO2, you can make cheaper products, like even methane you can make if you have cheap hydrogen as a storage battery. Now for everything else, so our cars emitting things, ships, even us breathing, right? Everything else is 400 ppm. And every order of magnitude that you need to concentrate a stream of any gas is an order of magnitude higher in price, which means that that CO2, by definition, is going to be much more expensive to use as a feedstock. So the process of direct air capture can be a lot of different things. You have solvents that they use. This was, let's say, the traditional process for a very long time. And you also have solutions that inherently use catalysts, like the one that we are working on, which I can't tell too much about because it's something that we're currently patenting. And this makes use of a catalyst in order to speed up a process that's been done for many, many years, and do it a little bit smarter, hopefully. So direct air capture, it's just a very general term, but yes, there are parts of direct air capture that utilize catalysts, and there are parts that don't. Mineralization is also a form of direct air capture. This is something that doesn't necessarily use a catalyst. It just puts a lot of energy into forcing CO2 to mineralize. Okay, is it the smartest way to do it? I don't think so. I think some type of mineralization can be, but forced mineralization, I don't know if that is the smartest thing to do because it's a lot of energy that goes into it. No. That's what I wanted to say, but I don't want to offend too many. So yeah, I have the luck to have known about catalysts for a very long time. My father is also in catalysis research, so I knew what that was. And as soon as I got the course as a third-year undergraduate student in catalysis, I was like, this is, whatever I will be doing, this is it. Because you can tune, you can play in any direction. If I want to go into oil, it's useful. If I want to work on greenhouse gas emissions, it's useful. Yeah.
It's not really to do with physics. What is the large scale of conversion? So what's happening now? And you read it in all kind of scientific papers that just the cloud of the Google, all those servers of the Google is like a small town, the requirement
right? So I always like, it's a very layered answer that I have to, or a lot of parts to the answer that I have to give. So first of all, 90% of our fossil fuels, I said, 90% goes towards energy already. It's always been like this for even when we were before, because more people are there, increasingly more comfortable lives, increasingly more people want to have, you know, a couple of different t-shirts to wear and stuff like this. So that's one. Then two, there are energy deployment laws, economic laws that exist, that exists for just simple reasons of how we produce things. Doesn't matter if it's green energy or if it's brown energy or if it's gray energy, doesn't matter. It's all the same. In the beginning, when a new technology comes to market that has high potential, it grows exponentially until it provides 1% of the world's energy consumption, and then it starts to grow linear. Because that scale of employing new technology, it just cannot be met by anything more. We can't all of a sudden produce 100 times more steel than we are used to, which is needed to make, you know, new whatever, solar panels and all of these things. And in any case, I referred to it also earlier, the chemical industry needs to be amortized. I always only read that word, so I was amortized. The chemical industry, and so that means that there is a renewal, that there's only space for an economic renewal of equipment, even if, let's say, that 1%, even holding on, of maximally 4% turnover rate of new. So we can only employ 4% of any energy-related technology. We can only turn it over at 4%. That's not a lot. And at the time, the speed of which we need to do something, we need to realize that the biggest solutions are going to come from technology that already exists. And this is a really good example that was given before. What are you going to do with these point sources of CO2 emissions? So you can already do things with them. Do them. Everything is there. The technology is there. And it's a complex situation. What you want to do first is not necessarily utilize the new renewable electricity, right, that you're employing to produce hydrogen or something, for example. Actually, what you want to do, which is dirtier, is just replace fossil fuels being burned to generate electricity. So it's a very delicate economic situation. I am a firm believer, I hope I'm not too naive, I am a firm believer that there's gonna be oil still in 20, 30, 40 years. I actually think it might be cleaner to stick with oil for a while. The thing is that we have to utilize smartly the emissions. That's it. And we need direct air capture technology. So this is something that, on the one hand, you want to have point source CO2 utilization, and on the other hand, you want to have direct air capture that just locks it away. So yeah, I'm personally working on both of those things. Yeah. My pleasure. My pleasure.
So, to wrap up, as you're thinking about all of this, when you think about universities here in the United States, Pepperdine, Stanford, MIT, Harvard, our students pay $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year to go to universities like that. They have these huge endowments. So when Charlotte was speaking about this wonderful institution that we're putting together that's multidisciplinary, or when she was talking about her lab that is being built, the state of Israel doesn't fund that. Those are all funded by donations that we raise in the US and Canada and China through the various societies. So as you go back and you think about my statement that a strong Israel is a strong Technion, or a strong Technion is a strong Israel, and you're thinking about charitable giving down the road, part of my job is to say, think about the Technion, and if it's something of interest to you, give me a call. My cards are in your files there. You're not going to hear from me. And for me, the big thing at this point is engagement. So if you'd like to get involved and you'd like to hear about different ways that you can help out with your time, I'd love to talk to you about that. Or if you'd like to just learn more, please feel free to pick up the phone and give me a call. That's what I'm here for. Again, thank you to our affiliates, the Temple Women's Association and the Brotherhood and the High Lifers. We really, really do appreciate it. And I want to thank Charlotte for her time. It was truly wonderful.
I can add something that I learned.
Yeah, go ahead.
$10 that a charitable donation is made to any university in the U.S., that we do the same with $1. Yeah. So that it goes a long way, I'd say, which I, as a Dutch person,
It does. So please join us out in the lobby. These are for you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today, and we have refreshments for you. So thanks again.